Before I get started, Jim, could I get you to pray over me or for me?
Most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for all the many mercies and blessings that you have so graciously given to us. Heavenly Father, I ask that you make us instruments of your peace and continue to build our faith, that we may glorify you and forgive any sins that may be held against us. We ask this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
I've been exposed to a long line of teachers. My father was a Signal Corps instructor as an active military and as a civilian for many years. My father-in-law was data processing teacher for Augusta Tech, ran the data processing department back when they used punch cards. My wife taught kids with reading disability and then later on became what back then was known as a teacher's aide. Now they call them something else, a paraprofessional or something. 3 of my 4 children are educators. I have a kindergarten teacher, I have a high school biology teacher, and I have a high school English literature teacher. I became retired in September and had some time on my hands, so I asked 2 of my kids, the 2 high school teachers, if I could come in and audit their class because I'd never seen them in their natural environment. They both said, well, sure, we'll get you done. And my daughter says, why don't you be a substitute teacher? Have you lost your mind? So it came up the other day, or a month or so ago. I got to thinking, said, well, wait a minute, let's. So I asked him to talk to the principal and see if they needed a substitute teacher at Aquinas. Now, Aquinas is a Catholic college prep high school. And the secretary said, sure, he's hired. And Kim said, well, we better run it by the principal first. So the principal just happened to be walking by, and she goes, talk to me about what? And Kim said, my dad being a substitute teacher. She said, is he easy to get along with? Kim said, yeah. He's hired. So with that, voluminous training, I became a high school substitute teacher. And the first class I got the substitute for, with a delicious bit of irony here, was Catholic religion. I just thought that was precious. But it's been a lot better than I expected because my worldview of high school was formed basically by movies like Crossing the Switchblade, To Serve with Love, Blackboard Jungle, and any number of B-grade movies from the 50s and 60s involving teenagers and fast cars and switchblades and guns. This is nothing like this. Like I said, it's a college prep environment there. They're still teenagers, though. But week before last, I was substituting, and they have the lesson plan, and basically what you do is get them started and then just crowd control till the bell rings again. So what they were studying was a book called 7 Men and Their Secret of Their Greatness by Eric Metaxas. The book was published in 2013, and it chronicles the lives of 7 men that had a tremendous impact and their faith. The men were George Washington, Eric Liddell, who, if the name doesn't ring a bell, he was the guy that was the Chariots of Fire was about. Chuck Colson, who was part of the driving force behind Nixon's administration and their troubles, who went on to start a tremendous prison ministry. Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in baseball. William Wilberforce, who helped end the slave trade. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who died in a concentration camp in Germany after resisting the Nazis. And Pope John Paul II. And the introduction to the book was just as important as the characters that it talked about. One of the questions it asked in the introduction was, what's a hero? And it used John Wayne as an example. He always played characters with strength, compassion. He was almost always a good guy. And he stood up for the weak and the downtrodden. I asked 2 classes, who's John Wayne? And I got 2 classes worth of who? That shows me the state of the American education system. They didn't know who John Wayne was. So this school has all the bells and whistles. So they've got a screen projector there, and it's tied into the computer. And with the computer, you can go into YouTube, and you can pull up the scene from True Grit, where he's in the field, over here by himself. 4 bad guys. And they jaw-jack for a few minutes, and the lone hero. Feel your hand, you, and at that point I muted it because I didn't know whether SOB was going to fly in school or not. And you know, when you're brand new, you don't want to take any chances. But it just astounded me that today's culture, when we were growing up, when you thought of hero, John Wayne, just like that. Nowadays, the kids are learning about fathers from TV. Men that are emasculated or buffoons. When we grew up, you had Robert Young on Father Knows Best, Danny Thomas on the Danny Thomas Show, Ward Cleaver. Men that you knew they loved their family. They went to work every day, worked hard, came home, and cleaned up whatever mess the beaver had caused during the day. Today's kids don't have that. Many of them are raised in single-parent homes, and there's not a hero figure in their lives. Today, being a hero or being masculine is a bad thing. Toxic masculinity. We're not raising kids, young men, to do the right thing. If you're masculine, you're macho, and that's bad, which I agree. You know, you're being a big shot, you're using strength to be domineering and a bully. They learn video game violence. And you'd be very hard-pressed to convince me that that's not a big problem, or a big part of the problem that we face now. But we're raising young men to believe that strength is to be feared, and therefore masculinity needs to be weakened to attain equality. They're not learning to control masculinity. Woke and cancel culture are doing their best to go back and rewrite history. Not saying that historical figures were perfect. No, we know that they weren't. And there's no value or use in asking forgiveness now or apologizing. That's not good enough. You've got to be erased. Heroes aren't men in shining armor. Their armor is often dented, bent, rusty, and dirty. They have feet of clay. Only one man has been perfect, and of course that's our Savior, Jesus Christ. One of the assignments the class had was to write about the 8th man. They pick out a hero and write about him, explaining why they're a hero. And the young men, almost completely, first thing they talked about was sports heroes. Well, Kobe Bryant. And I knew that that wasn't going to fly when the teacher came back and read the assignment. So I said, are you willing to defend that decision against the parameters of what we're talking about here, about chivalry, respect, honor, things like that? And all of them backed down. One guy did say, well, he gave a lot of money to charity. Well, that's easy. He was rich. Not much of a strain there. My generation followed behind the greatest generation. It was easy to have heroes then. We could talk to heroes, men that had gone off to war and faced things that we couldn't even imagine. I remember as a boy reading the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo about Jimmy Doolittle and the brave men that flew off an aircraft carrier in a bomber and bombed Japan. Did it change the tide of the war? No, didn't have much of an effect at all. But it did change the American psyche. It gave us hope that, hey, we can do something about this. That's what heroes do. When you say heroes, a lot of times people think of guys coming in with guns blazing like John Wayne across the field. But that's not the norm for heroes in our daily life. We see heroes usually don't see themselves as heroic. My eldest daughter was a seventh grader. Yeah, seventh grader. She was going to a magnet school, which I had to take her. If she was going to get there, we had to take her. And as we were going to school, she was upset. I could tell. Well, what's wrong, Kim? I just can't get my hair to act right this morning. Now, to me, that was no big deal. But she's a seventh grade girl, and seventh grade girls can be among the cruelest creatures in the world. So we went to the car line. I dropped off her little sister and little brother, and I said, well, I'll tell you what. We'll just ride around the block till you get your hair like you wanted, and I'll take you and sign you in. I had no idea I was doing anything. Till for my 65th birthday, my kids all wrote something about a memory about their dad. And that was the one that Kim picked. What are you going to do? Guns blazing? No, but I wouldn't have traded that for the world. There was a family that lived behind us that we've been close to for, mid-80s now. Our kids played with their kids. Our kids were in their kids' weddings. Their kids were in our kids' weddings. And their son, Ben, about 4 years old, first time I met him. And like I said, he's been in and out of my house a million times. And he mentioned something several years ago, and I asked him to write it for me. And I can't read it to you. I got to have Dick do it. Dick, would you read that, please?
I've always believed that my Christian walk, like most people, has been formed by specific moments throughout the years. I believe the Lord uses organic experiences that aren't created in a church or in deep contemplative prayer, but times when the Holy Spirit anoints a moment spent living Christianity as Christ called the apostles to. One such moment happened years ago as my brother Ed Martin, I was much younger, about 15-ish, and Uncle Ed and I had been asked to help assist and protect a group of young ladies on a youth ministry trip spent camping in the North Georgia mountains. One morning, as the ladies were out on their youth ministry excursion, Uncle Ed and I ran into town to restock supplies. On this particular morning, it was cold, raining, and very wet. We picked up the supplies, loaded the supplies into an older Ford Explorer, hopped in the car, and planned to head back to camp and prepare for the day. Fortunately, the Lord had other plans. Most people might say the experience we were about to have was unfortunate, but it was a formative experience in my growth as a Christian that I consider it very fortunate. We hopped in the car. Uncle Ed stuck the key in the ignition and nothing happened. Nothing. As I recall, the first thing Uncle Ed did was check the battery connections in the rain. No issues. Next, we climbed under the car and laid in the puddles and checked the starter. Ed determined that the starter was the cause of the issues. And so we went back inside and purchased some tools and proceeded to remove the starter and walk in the rain to the auto parts store to get a new starter. Being a 15-year-old kid, I had no idea what to do or how to help, so I just stuck with Ed. I can't recall what we talked about, but what I do remember how much I enjoyed such a horrible time. After what I considered to be a significant amount of time, we returned to the car, installed the new starter, but still, the car didn't start. And then the oddest thing happened. Ed started laughing. I remember that more than I remember anything else about that day. I said, "Why are you so happy? My dad would be so mad right now, and I would understand if you were." And then he said one of the most profound statements that I've ever heard. "What on earth do I have to be mad about? I have a healthy family. I don't have cancer. I'm spending the experience with a great brother." At that moment, the words from Scripture came to my mind. "In all things, give thanks to God." God sent me on that trip to hear those words. He fostered my relationship with Uncle Ed throughout the years so I could hear that one statement. To this day, I try and live my life with the love, zeal, and passion that Uncle Ed had on that day. I can't tell you how we got home, or even how the Explorer was repaired, but until the day I die, I will always remember the words that the Lord gave Uncle Ed to give me that day.
I was going to title this talk, "Our Hero's Still Out There." But after further review, if I had to title it, I'd call it, "We Just Don't Know What the Effect of Dropping Our Pebble in the Pond of Someone Else's Life Will Be." Did I have any idea at that time? No. No. And I'm sure all of you have had moments and had men in your lives that were there just like that. We don't know when the time will come, but we got to be ready for it. And by giving that kind of example, we can help young men be prepared to do the same thing for others. A few more things. This was a prized possession for me. It was my dad's. And it's a bit unusual. If y'all, I'm sure some of you can see the blades on this knife? How they're worn? They're not shaped like a regular pocket knife. Many hours of my young life was spent with my dad, talking, and I couldn't tell you a thing we said to save my life. But Dad would take his pocket knife out, pick up a stick, and just start curling it. Now, to maintain a knife that'll really get you good long curls off a stick, it's got to be sharp. And that's what happened to the blades on this knife, because Dad didn't just sit there and talk to me while he was whittling. He talked to me while he was sharpening that knife. Had that Arkansas whetstone in his hand, and a little gentle scraping noise. Now, it could be annoying if you let it. But he just, till he got the edge on that knife. And like I said, I can't remember a single thing we ever talked about. But he was there for me. How many of you guys played Little League ball growing up? I can remember hot summer afternoon. Usually before supper time, we'd be at practice out behind Wheeless Road Elementary School in South Augusta. Coach would pull up in his old car. He'd raise the trunk, and we kids would dash over there to help carry the equipment bag. Now, the equipment bag back then was an old GI duffel bag. Green. The bottom of it was almost wore off because it was so full of balls and bats and bases that some of the kids couldn't pick it up. They had to drag it. But the coach, that was a sacrifice. Now, he had two sons on the team, both wicked pitchers. But this was a man that worked a full-time job all day. And then before he could go home and have supper, he'd meet a bunch of ragtag kids in floppy tennis shoes and jeans with holes in the knees of them. You remember the old striped shirts, all of us wearing those, and baseball cap pulled down over our eyes. He was forming us. And with most guys, coach is a reverent term. It means something. It's a sign of respect for the wisdom that was imparted, the patience, the skills. Well, can't say skills because I still have trouble squatting down in front of a hot ground ball. That sucker was going to jump up and bite me in the face. I just knew it. Examples. Young men that will stop and say, what would Barry Thompson do in a situation like this? What would Jim Hinkle do in a situation like this? Or Dick Murphy, or Paul Gentleman, or Adam Ellis, or Benton Starks? We have the ability and the need to touch young men's lives. To lead, you must be a servant. Matthew 20:27. Frodo. I can't do this, Sam. Sam. I know, it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here, but we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something, even though you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept on going because they were holding on to something. Frodo. What are we holding on to, Sam? Sam. That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. Are we going to live our lives as an example and fight for what is good and true in our world, or lay down our values and teachings and surrender without a fight? Thank you.